So I've been noticing certain talking points about mixed people celebrating being part indigenous and who is pure, who isn't. And as a mixed person, I have a little something to say about this, and I might be a little bit hypocritical in this video, but I wanted to hop on here real quick just to share my thoughts. So first and foremost, I would like to say that there is nothing wrong with being mixed, and if you have found any type of mixture in your family tree, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not going to die. You're not going to melt. You're still a human at the end of the day. And the reason why I am saying all of that is because there are people who are saying that they are pure indigenous and they have no mixture in their family. And who am I to tell you who you are and who you aren't? So if there isn't any mixture in your family, then it's not a big deal. But if you have found any type of mixture in your family, it's still not a big deal and it doesn't change who you are at the end of the day. So, yeah, and I feel like when we think of indigenous people being mixed, in the black community, you automatically think of the African slave trade. And that's not everybody's story. Even though there has been some people who said that they found African slave ancestors in their tree, that doesn't mean that every so-called black American has that in their family history. To me personally, I feel like the African slave trade was exaggerated, just my opinion, because that's not everybody's story. And the school system and all that tried to make it everybody's story, and it's not. So to me, it's just a little bit exaggerated. Although there are other things that have taken place in America's past. Like, for instance, my dad, he is of Tuscarora descent on his dad's side, and on his mother's side, his mother is from Jersey. We don't know too much about that side of the family because her parents did disown her when she started dating my grandfather. So there's that. All I know is that they're from like Burlington, New Jersey. Um, so I don't know. I believe there's Indian on that side of the family too, just based off of certain things that I've heard. But my father is of like Tuscarora descent, and we haven't found any type of African ancestor on his side of the family. Although years ago, he was at his doctor's appointment and his doctor was, checking on his blood, and she found that he has Egyptian in his blood. I don't know how that works, but she was like really surprised because he shares something that a lot of Egyptians share in their blood. I think it has to do with some type of bug. I'm not sure, and I think from what I remember, it has something to do with malaria, which I have to look into that because they're saying that malaria started in Egypt and something unique to that. I don't know. But this was years ago when my father found this out, and doing my DNA test, because I did multiple, at one point on Ancestry.com, it did show like Turkish descent, like close to like the Middle East. Yes, I know Egypt is in Africa, but I'm just saying, like certain DNA tests that I've gotten, it showed like a lot of like the Middle Eastern parts, like around that. So, I mean, it's really interesting. And to sum this all up, because the reason why I'm talking about this, going back to my original point, I did find in certain records and research that there has been cases of Middle Eastern people showing up in America. I don't know what year this was, but there was a story or a record of, I think, like 20 something Moors that were men. They ended up in North Carolina. They was in the Wilmington part where my father's father is from, and I believe they was like Middle Eastern. And then I think there's some accounts of Middle Eastern, like the Moors or whatever, in Jersey. So I mean, there's that going on, and they never really spoke about this in school. As far as I know, growing up in the school system, they never really spoke about Middle Eastern, like Moors or whatever, in America. So there were other things that were taking place besides just the African slave trade. And all the parts of America, there's like other stories, like the Creoles, they have their own like side of the story, and all these other groups. So if you do find out that you are mixed, it doesn't have to be because of the African slave trade, even though there's nothing wrong with having a African ancestor. I'm just saying, because I do understand the frustration where there are people trying to tell Black Americans that no, you are this. So now it's like I see a lot of Black Americans who are trying to find their indigenous side. They're going too far to the right to defend themselves about being indigenous. And you don't have to defend yourself, but I get it. But it's becoming to a point where it's like I'm hearing things about we're the pure ones and this and that, and everybody else is like watered down, and they shouldn't be celebrating being indigenous, and yada 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 yada. So there's nothing wrong with being indigenous and mixed. That doesn't take away from who you are. I find that so weird how as mixed people, it's like people are trying to tell us you're not, if you're in the Black community, you're not Black enough. If you're someone like myself that is more in the indigenous community, now there's talking points of who is more pure enough to celebrate that. And to me, it's like you cannot take away my ancestry. There's nothing wrong with celebrating being part indigenous. Now, this is the part where it gets a little bit hypocritical for me, because I feel like to an extent, like to me, I just feel like there is a borderline where it becomes delusional as a mixed person to celebrate being like indigenous, even though there's nothing wrong with honoring your ancestors. So I'm talking about the people who are maybe 90% of something else. And yes, I'm using percentages. Um, I'm talking about the people who are like majority of something else, and maybe have had a great 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 grandparent who was Indian. And I have seen some people like that in the indigenous community who will be like majority white or something, and they walk around like they are full on indigenous, and they at the same in the same tone they try to tell, not that they're trying to tell other people, but it's in their attitude. They look at other people trying to find their indigenous ancestors and just be like, well, you're not the pure one because you're not in the culture. Or yeah, so if you're not in the culture, you're not indigenous. And to me that's weird, because it's like, just because I myself was not brought up in the indigenous community, that doesn't take away from my ancestry. Like, I don't have to walk around with certain stones and feathers and going to powwows every other summer or something to be indigenous. Like, I'm still indigenous even with my casual clothing on and listening to hip hop or something. Like, so to me, that's just weird. And I just find it weird how there are certain people who are majority of something else not pretending, okay, because you do have like some sort of indigenous in your family, but you're majority of something else. So it's like, what is the issue of like, why are you not celebrating what you are majority of? Like, what's wrong with being majority Irish or something like that? Or even if you are like African and you're trying to find that 2%, I don't know. if you're celebrating that 2% indigenous side, it's like, what's the issue of what you majority are now, like your genetic makeup? So real quick, to put myself in their shoes, because I have thought about this, and I have a story. So a few generations ago in my family tree, there has been a ancestor who was Mexican and another one who was Cuban. So this is on my mother's side. And the story goes, it was like 5 generations ago or something like that. Like, I don't know, 4 or 5, something around those lines. There was a Cuban ancestor who came here illegally with her siblings. Um, they escaped Cuba and they came here on a boat. And this ancestor laid low. So when I was trying to find records of this ancestor, I barely found any besides that they came from like the West Indies. And this person got with a Mexican man, and they had kids, and the kids mixed in with the indigenous community, and there was that. I don't really know too much about that side. I do know that one of my aunts, they say that she has the same mannerisms of the Mexican ancestor, for the elders who passed away, but still remember the previous generations. So they obviously saw him or whatever. They said that she walks and acts just like him. He was short, brown skin, and I believe he had a flat back, because my auntie has a flat back. And no offense to the Mexicans, but a lot of Mexicans be having flat backs. I know they don't like to hear that, but it's just an observation. But anyway, the point is that was a few generations ago. Now, I myself, every day, people assume that I am Spanish. I do not identify with that. I do not resonate with being Spanish. But there's a little bit of that going further back in my family tree. Um, I get it all the time. Like a couple of weeks ago, one of my managers at my job tried to speak to me in Spanish, but I was like, I don't know Spanish. And this person looked at me confused and got a little bit upset. And I get that a lot. Like, Spanish people will look at me and get upset that I don't know Spanish, because they just see me as one of them. And I remember at one point when I was younger, because that's what people just kept identifying me as, and I'm like, should I even try to like adapt to that or something? But it just didn't sit right, because it's not who I am. Like, it's in my tree, but that was like a while ago. Like, I do not identify as being like Spanish or whatever. So for me to even like I recognize it, it's there, but for me to even celebrate being Spanish or whatever, it's like I'm being something that I'm not. Like, that's not really who I am. It's not me. So for people who are a majority of something else but want to celebrate being well, not celebrate, but just walk around as if they are like the pure ones, it's like, why are you not happy with who you are today? It kind of gives insecurity in a way, because it is becoming like a trend in a way to be a indigenous American. I don't know. I feel like certain companies in a way, not to play the blame game, but like for instance with Disney, with the whole Pocahontas and the way they designed her, a lot of girls be fantasizing being like a Pocahontas. So I don't know. I guess that I can see why that is becoming like such a trend. But I don't know. It's just I just find that delusional in a way. There's nothing wrong with honoring your ancestors, but you have to accept what you are today. So for me, if it wasn't for me having so much indigenous ancestors in my recent tree, I probably even wouldn't be seeking the whole indigenous side of my family. I would recognize that it's there, but I most likely wouldn't want to be enrolled in a tribe because that's not majority of what I am. The only reason why I seek this out was because I was getting told I wasn't black enough, so I was just like, whatever. I know that I'm mixed anyway, and I should be trying to figure that out. That's one. Two, I don't like how this whole school system, government, whatever, is lying to us, trying to tell us who we are. So I'm stubborn. Like, I want to know my truth. So therefore, I went seeking out to find this indigenous side of the family. And three, I've been told that a lot since I was younger, that we are Indians, this, that, and the third. So, that was a big part of my family history. And to have something so big in my family, it's like, why are we not um, seeking that, celebrating that? Identifying as that, like, why are we hiding it? It's a big old thing. But that's the only reason why. Like, if I was majority of something else, I couldn't see myself really um trying to put on this full blown side of me that I'm no longer am, if that makes sense. So yeah, and I think as mixed people, if you are like, not to play the whole percentage game, but if you are like 50% or something like that, or 20 25%, whatever, like, I don't think it's a big deal to celebrate it, like, or honor that or whatever. It's not a big deal. So for people who try to tell you you can't celebrate that side, it's, especially if it's a big part of your genetic makeup right now, it's like, who are you to tell someone who they can't and can't celebrate? Even though I have been hypocritical so far, because I'm telling people who have like 2% in their family, what I'm saying is, just to clarify this even more, I'm not saying don't celebrate it. I'm not saying don't honor it. You can, you should, but to walk around like you are the pure one and look at everybody else like, what are you doing? That's when it becomes a problem. Just my opinion. Now, what I think the bigger issue here, which I think I'm gonna save for another video, is the whole complexion and feature thing. And I've been hearing a lot about that. And for now, I'm gonna just leave it as like, me, I come from a family of all complexions, and I feel like the complexions don't play a part at all. Um, I've I got pictures of ancestors who are full blown Indigenous American. They are light skin, brown skin, and my dad's father, who was Tuscarora, he was dark skinned, and his sister was light skinned, same parents. So, I come from a family of different complexions. I don't think that plays a part. Um, well, to me, in my truth, I know it doesn't play a part. Um, I think as far as features, though, I can't help but to agree and disagree on that. So, because I do notice, the more I meet people in the Indigenous community, the more I see so much resemblance. Like, a lot of people that I've met, they look like we all look like we could be family. And, I think it plays a part in a way. So I'm going to save that for next video. One more thing before I get off of here, before I go, because it just came to me. So when it comes to my opinion does not represent all of Indigenous people's opinions. Like, everyone in this community have different thoughts on this. And yeah, so I do not represent everyone's ideologies on who can celebrate being Indigenous, and who can and whatnot. So there's that. So before anybody gets on me, we all have different views on this, and that's totally fine.